need political change, we need kind of policy change, and yet young people, minorities, they have some of the lowest voter turnout rates. Can you talk a little bit about that, and how do you get that to move? How do you get that to change?
Sure. I mean, that's intentional. I think there's this narrative about young people don't vote because we're disengaged, we're lazy, we don't care. I don't know that I buy that. I mean, it is absolutely true that young people tend to be less engaged with the formal political process than older people. That was true when boomers were young, too. If you go back and you read the New York Times from the 1980s, everyone was wringing their hands about how do we get these young boomers to get to the voting booth. And eventually they did in 1984, and they re-elected Ronald Reagan. So thanks for that.
I did not vote for him in 1984.
But what you're seeing now is a long-standing concerted effort on the right to systematically disenfranchise voters of color. You saw this when the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act. You've seen it now with Republicans who essentially realize that the more people you enfranchise and the more people who have the ability to cast their ballots, the less well they do. If they cared about people voting and young people voting, we would all be able to do mail-in ballots. We would perhaps even have electronic voting mechanisms that were safe and secure. We wouldn't disenfranchise, and I think in 11 different states, people that have committed certain felonies after they've served their time are no longer allowed to vote in the US. We would not have hours and hours and hours long lines outside of voting stations in communities of color. We wouldn't have courts, for example, in North Carolina striking down Republican quote-unquote voter ID legislation that they said, and I'm going to get the language wrong here, but something like, precision targeted at disenfranchising Black voters. So to me, the issue is less, let's all kind of yell at millennials for not voting, and more, let's ask, well, why isn't it easy to vote on a college campus? Why do you have to wait in line for hours to vote? Why is voting day not a national holiday? I'm not sure how to get young people and voters of color to the voting booth if those are the same folks who tend to be working multiple low-wage jobs, cobbling together a bunch of different resources to try and feed their families, and then you're also expecting them to go stand in line, in Atlanta for 5 hours to have a political voice. The system has been set up, again, against young people, against voters of color. And I think the answer is not, of course, I would like to see more millennials getting the support of, for example, Democratic Party to run for office. I think that would be energizing for young people. I think that it's important. But really, we need to knock down these intentionally erected barriers that keep us from voicing our political beliefs.
She says it's common for younger generations to butt heads with their parents' generations. How do past intergenerational conflicts compare to current ones between millennials and boomers? Are there lessons to be learned from past generational conflict, or is this conflict unique to the present moment? So Jill, can you start with that one?
Sure. Intergenerational warfare is definitely nothing new. I think boomers themselves should understand this probably better than anyone, because when they were kids, and young adults, there was so much hand-wringing about all the ways in which they were doing it wrong. There was a famous Tom Wolfe essay in New York Magazine called The Me Generation. All about baby boomers were this generation of self-involved, navel-gazing narcissists, following either, maybe it was Christianity, maybe it was, Eastern mysticism, but that they were all just completely interested in self-examining their sort of hollow, empty selves. And before boomers, everybody was concerned about beatniks, with their, randy poetry. So this is the idea that the kids are doing it wrong is definitely not new. I'm sure by the time millennials are in our 50s and 60s, we're going to be complaining about whatever young kids are doing. We don't understand. It's like I don't get TikTok. I'm already trending in that direction. I get it. And so this tension between boomers thinking that millennials are all entitled kids who have it easy while they had to walk to school uphill both ways. Very far from a new dynamic. I would say what is different about the millennial boomer divide is that I'm not sure you've ever seen a generation in American history that has been as dominant as boomers have for this long. There has been a boomer in the White House as either president or vice president since 1989. 30 years. And there's never been anyone younger. You've had a few silent generation people, right? Dick Cheney, Joe Biden. But you've never had a Gen Xer, certainly never had a millennial. And so they have had this total stranglehold on American politics for the entirety, I'm 37, and been for the entirety of my life. That dominated the electorate. So that I think is different, that not only have they been in charge for so long, but they also have been totally unwilling to cede really any power or to share it. And boomers are staying in the workplace longer. They're not retiring as early as previous generations. They're certainly staying in Congress a lot longer. They're staying in state legislatures for much longer. So that sense of generational friction, where I think millennials feel like, well, our lives have been indelibly shaped by you guys, often for the worse. And now you're refusing to step back, even though the oldest millennials are 40. You're not letting us come in to the same kind of power that you held when you were our age. I think that dynamic is new and is very real. And I think the grievances on the millennial side are pretty legitimate.